What does reaching the unreached halfway around the world look like? Stick around, and we'll talk about that and a whole lot more with our special guest on this episode of Here at Home. Welcome to the Here at Home podcast, a podcast about the people here at McGregor, their stories, their ministry, and their love for Jesus. My name is Mark Bricker, your host for the Here at Home podcast. And this is our next to the last podcast for the season. That's right, we're about ready to wrap up another season, so make sure you listen in next week for our season finale. I promise you're going to love it. It's going to be a really good episode. But joining me today on this week's podcast are Campbell and Elizabeth. So glad to have you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're
And
happy to be here.
Well, awesome. And as I mentioned earlier, I asked you earlier, is this your first time being on a podcast? You said, yes, it is. And most of our guests, this is their first time being on a podcast. So just take a deep breath, relax. It's going to be wonderful. Most of the folks listening probably don't know Campbell and Elizabeth, so let's start there. This is kind of a fun part for me. We get to hear a little bit about where you're from, a little bit about you. So who'll go first? Elizabeth? Campbell? She's pointing to Campbell. All right.
Yeah.
I'll go first. Well, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and my family were not believers and didn't grow up in a believing home. In fact, I guess growing up most of my life, I always questioned, like, who's God? Who's the real God? Came to faith through a church camp. I didn't really come to faith, but kind of sparked the questions in my mind. And, as they were sharing, teaching about, I don't remember exactly what, but just the idea of God was constantly like in my mind from the camp session.
Right.
And since then, I was like, I remember asking a prayer like, God, if you're real, if you're real, somehow show me that. And just looking for something miraculous. Nothing really happened that day, kind of. But after that, I went off to college, and then just starting to meet a lot of believers that were inviting me to things. I just took that as God's response to my prayer. Went, studied the Bible. I was in a home Bible study for about 6 months. I asked questions after questions, week after week, and then finally came to the conclusion: this is true. The Word of God is who He is, and that's who I am, and gave my life to Christ. And then at that point realized, well, there's really nothing better to do in my life than if this is what Christ has done for me, then what else would I'm going to do with my life, other than to serve Him and to see His glory and His message be proclaimed.
Yeah. What kind of impact did your salvation have on the rest of your family?
Well, it is, so since coming on the Lord, there was a burden on my heart to get the new message to my family. And that was always the biggest barrier, because I don't know what they're going to think. This is something foreign to them, and I shared, I tried to be gentle, but just didn't really know how to do it well. It took a while. I shared with my mom. She was not interested. Didn't just share with my grandmother. She eventually, at the age about 80 something, she received Christ.
Oh, wow.
Then this is a little kind of timeline through, like about 10 years later, I went abroad for mission, and then came back. And then as I was, talking to my mom, and then she's, I don't know what's going to happen. Do you know what's going to happen after death? She finally said, okay, just go. I'll go to church, So I just found the nearest church, went there, and give you a little backstory. My mom is a single mother, and when my dad was dying from cancer, the same year that I was born, a nurse shared the gospel with my dad.
Oh, wow.
And he became a believer, and then the nurse started taking my mom to church. But, she was just too busy. She was a single mother. newly immigrant to America, had to take care of me, so she couldn't go to church every Sunday. So eventually she faded out and stopped going to church. So therefore, as I grew up, I never heard about the gospel at all.
This story about his dad, he actually never heard until later.
Until my mom came to faith.
Oh, wow.
So all these years, he just
Didn't know.
So fast forward back to me telling my mom about the gospel, and then I just feel like I need more witnesses. I can't do it by myself. So then connected her. She said she'll go to church. So I found a church that's 5 minutes from my house. We went there, and as the pastor went to preach, my mom tells me, "Oh, I know him." So then I was like, "How
do you
can
know
I know him?" So my mom shows me a picture of the pastor holding me as a baby. So that was the same church that the nurse went to when my dad passed away.
But it was a different location in the city, so that's why.
Yeah, it's not in the same location anymore.
Wow.
And
Goosebumps.
Yeah.
and then my mom because at that time we were getting married. We got married, moved down to about 2 hours from where my mom was living, and then my mom just started going on her own. She went to Bible study every week. 1 year later, she called us. She said, "Hey, I'm going to get baptized." So then that's how my mom came to faith.
Oh, wow.
So.
That is really cool. I'm glad I asked what kind of impact it had on your family.
Yeah.
That's a neat story.
Yeah.
So God was at work. I mean, God's always at work, but it's like way back,
Yeah.
even before like.
And to know
he
that
knew
about
any
your
of
dad.
this.
Yeah. Wow. Elizabeth, what about you?
So I'm from Texas. My dad is a pastor, so I grew up as a PK.
Yeah.
And I guess a little bit about my testimony. From a young age, I heard about Jesus, and one Wednesday night at church, have you heard of Johnny Erickson Tata? Mm-hmm. So when I was 6 years old, we were watching her movie, and I thought it was cool because, what kid doesn't like to, watch a movie at church and things like that. So just being impacted, like her story is, she had this accident, she became paralyzed, and her life changed. But so I just remember, even as a young 6-year-old child, thinking, what if something happened to me? Like, what if, and not just God had an accident, what if I died? And I knew I was a sinner. All the things my parents had been teaching me. So I felt the conviction of the Lord, and I prayed at a young age, asking him to be the Lord and Savior of my life. And it's just been neat to see, even from that young age, it was a true decision.
Yeah.
Of course, I didn't know everything, all these deep, maybe theological things at that time, but I had faith like a child.
Yeah.
And so I accepted the Lord, and it's the best decision I ever made.
Yeah. So grew up in Texas, went to school in Texas, all that. So how did the two of you guys meet?
So after college, I went to East Asia and served for a couple years. And as I was serving overseas, coming back after my time doing missions, I realized I need some more theological education. So I went to seminary, and that is where I met Campbell. And so, so.
Did you have a class together, or mutual friends, or how all that?
I think we met at a summer. It was kind of
during summer
overlap.
school.
Yeah,
Okay.
It was a summer term. And then there was less of us on campus.
Yeah.
So that's how I think we had a mutual friend that had a birthday.
Yeah.
And then we just met
Kind of
there.
started talking and becoming friends. And
The rest is history.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, did you at this time already feel a call, Campbell, to full-time missions?
No,
Serving in that capacity?
Actually, so I came to faith during my university years. I taught high school for a year and just felt like I want God to use my life, and felt the need. I mean, I was doing serving at my church and teaching high school, and just wanted to be more well equipped. And then I guess the pastor asked me, "Hey, you want to be able to serve in a more? Do you feel like God's calling you to serve in more full time?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And then that idea of theological education came, and then that's when I went for more theological training and learning. And then that's when I was at theological school that I began to hear so many people coming from overseas talking about what God has been doing. And that really sparked my interest. And then at the same time, I was actually teaching through the book of Acts in my church. And I'm like, well, my life doesn't look anything like this, what I'm reading. How can my life reflect of what I'm reading in scriptures? So that's when that interest grew, and I actually got to go and serve overseas for about 2-3 years.
Yeah. Now, y'all aren't married yet, though, are you?
No.
No.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we graduated from seminary, and then we both went to East Asia, but we weren't married. We went to 2 different places.
Okay.
And then kind of through that, we
stay connected.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's how
God's timing.
Relationship blossomed.
So obviously, though, it's kind of neat because both of you had a heart passion for serving in that capacity specifically. So God was working individually in your lives, but ultimately planning to bring you together. So talk a little bit about your call then, Elizabeth.
Yeah. I don't know if many churches have it. Have you heard of GA's, Girls in Action?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it's like a Wednesday night program for girls. And so I did that, like first grade to sixth
And
grade.
the GAs and the RAs.
Yes.
I was an RA.
Yes,
actually.
Royal Ambassador. So just hearing about mission work and, like the lostness in the world and the need to hear about the Savior. And so, and my dad also, him going on many short-term trips, like throughout my childhood, and him coming back and sharing like what God was doing overseas. And so it just really put like an interest in me, and so actually at GA camp when I was 12 years old, some missionaries came and spoke, and I really felt like God was speaking to my heart about, as I got older, to work overseas. And so
even at early age,
even at 12,
you knew where
I felt
God
that.
was calling.
Yeah,
that's neat. I forgot to mention this at the very beginning of or early on in our podcast, but obviously you guys are not members of our church here at McGregor. Normally we have folks that are members, but you are partners with us, and we partner with you guys, and we'll talk, and we're getting ready to dive into what you do, but we have sent teams to partner with you in the past, and hopefully we will send more teams in the future. Yes. But let's dive in now, and I just needed to get that in there. Some people are like, I've never seen them around the church. Are they?
Who are they?
Yeah, who are they? Yeah, that's the connection with that we have with McGregor, with Campbell and Elizabeth. So tell us now a little bit, maybe give us kind of the overview of the ministry, and then we can kind of dive into some of the specifics of what you're doing, where God has placed you.
Okay. So we are currently living in South Asia, and we felt called and led there because we saw a map basically of where the most unreached people are, and that most red dots was in South Asia. Yeah. So we were open. We're like, Lord, just take us where the need is, and that map was a very instrumental in leading us there. Yeah. So we've been there about 7-8 years now, and we've been serving. And our South Asia is a populated area, very heavy population. In our area, I would say just the amount of people we're looking at reaching is 30 million people over a span of about 7 districts. Okay, and each district is equivalent to like a county, kind of. So you could say 7 counties with 30 million people. How do you get the gospel to them? Especially if not that many of them are probably heard of Jesus, but have no clue who Jesus is.
Right.
And have very misconceptions and them themselves diving into different kind of idolatry and different types of other ways of worship that they do not know what it means to be saved. So our goal is that we desire that the nationals that are living there would see the vision to see churches planted in all the districts, so that throughout the generation there will be a gospel witness until Christ comes back.
Yeah.
And we feel there's lots of people groups. I think just in these 7 districts, we're talking about 80 plus people groups, meaning that each of them have their own culture, maybe language, home language, different ways of doing things, and it doesn't reach so quickly as if it's all one culture.
So
not only do you
the barriers.
not only do you have that huge number of people, but these multiple people groups as well that are, so the different cultures. So quite a challenge.
Right. So we have a lifetime, if not multiple lifetimes of work, but we were praying that it just takes one lifetime. And we are asking that the Lord would raise up nationals who would catch the vision, know what to do, and be able to multiply churches throughout these 7 districts.
So what is some of the specific things you do in, number one, identifying those nationals that may be potential leaders? And then once you have identified them, what type of training and equipping are you providing for them to lead a local church themselves?
Yeah, what we do is that we kind of walk through the process. If I could, but the way I see the scripture is that, what we call it the core task, where the first task is, you got to do if it's an unreached place, you have to do entry. Once you enter, then you share the gospel. Once you share the gospel, then you got to equip them, make disciples. After discipleships are made, then you got to form them, gather them to become churches. And then as they become a church, then you got to raise up leaders within the church so that the leaders can lead these churches. So we're calling it leadership development. And then at that moment, when that's happening and we're seeing, hopefully, generations are coming, because discipleship is a continuous process, then we could say the planter, whoever that is, whoever we're training up, they can then think about exiting and then exploring new fields and new areas. So that's kind of the idea we're taking.
The steps, yeah.
We're guiding them. They might not know the whole process, but hey, everybody's got to share the gospel. So let's start with that. And then as things work, as fruit is happening, then we guide them to the next step.
Yeah. What does a specific, and I'll ask both of you this question, a typical day or few days in the life of the ministry look like for you and for you?
Typical day would be, there's really no typical day in a way, but in general, maybe in a week's time, somehow we're able to make connections with the church that we're talking about in the villages, and they want help. They want to be equipped. They want to be trained. So we offer to train the church, all the members. Hey, let's equip them. Many of them really, most of the churches there are very just the understanding of the gospel message is very simple. So we want to make some clarity with that, what it means, what is the gospel, and how do you actually go and share it. So a first training would be just simply, how do we share the gospel with the lost? And we train them, we walk them through the process, we help them see from Scripture, this is God's heart, this is God's passion, this is God's purpose and plan for mankind, that they would know the glory of the Lord. So we train them, and then we task them to go out and share with their neighbors and friends and see what happens and see who's interested. And then we have them gather those names, and then maybe about 3 weeks later, we come back and say, hey, did you do what we taught you? Okay, oh yeah, I got 5 people. Oh, I got 6 people that I found. All right, then let's move on to this next phase of training. Now go back to them and start like a little secret group. And and gather about 10 people, if you're able to, maybe their friends, their neighbors, and just do a secret group study. Here's a booklet that you can use, and they do that. And in that way, that's how a group gets initially formed.
Yeah.
And ideally, our hope is that through them leading these secret group, beginning they're unbelievers, and then at the end, some would profess, hey, I believe. And obviously, there will be some that says, I'm not interested, I'm not going to come anymore. Yeah. But the gospel is going out and see how the Lord is moving them.
You have a real heart passion, it sounds like, for equipping those believers as well as those leaders.
Yes, and the reason is because they're nationals. I mean, they're local. They're going to be there. They have access to their nation. I do not.
Right.
We could lose a visa. We could, something happens. We're not there. It's local ownership.
Yeah.
Right. And someday, as long as the Lord is opening the door here, I'm going to work hard to build them up, and they will be the one that actually carry the gospel.
That does the work. Yeah. What about you, Elizabeth? What does a typical day, week look like for you?
So we have a son. So he's 7 years old, and so I homeschool him. So typical week during the school year is I'm doing homeschool.
Schoolwork.
Yeah, but also I have the heart to do ministry just as much. So trying to really incorporate even our son into ministry. And so, like, for example, on Fridays, me and our son, we will go to a certain area that we have like a children's and women's ministry. And so we, they call it Sunday school, but it's not on Sunday, it's on Friday, but that's just what it's called. So we go to this kind of slum area, and we've been going there for about 2 years. The neat way of how this ministry started is, we lived in a tall building, and from our building, I could look down from our kitchen table and see this area. And so I just started praying for this area. And my mom got to come and visit. And at breakfast, she would sit at our table and look down, and she would pray for the same area. And so one day we were talking, we were like, I pray for this building. And my mom was like, oh, I pray for this building. And so I was talking with one of our national partners, a lady, and I said, let's go out and do some prayer walking. And so we did. We started going out and prayer walking and everything. And the exact place that we had been looking at from my house down in, that's the exact place that we met these women and these children, and they were open to us coming once a week and doing a ministry there. And so it's really neat to bring our son along, because at that time he was smaller, and I would actually, this was even before COVID, so even I guess more than a couple years ago, I would just put him on my back in a carrier, and we just go out walking and praying, and God just. So it really shows the power of prayer. Just even for before going down there and prayer walking, we were praying from our house just for this area, and then God just really working. So that's something those listening to this could pray for that area. There's none of them have believed yet in Jesus, but we're thankful that we still have an open door and favor in that community, and so. And I think sometimes coming from many of the people we work are from a Hindu context. And so coming from that, it's very normal to just kind of, they like to hear about Jesus, but kind of add Jesus to the other different gods that they worship. And so that's a prayer that, these women, these men, these children in this area would come to know that Jesus, he's the way, the truth, the life. Yeah. He's the only way.
And Elizabeth also does training for the women.
Yeah.
A lot of times there are groups of women that wants to learn how to do the gospel work. So she's trained some women and leading them to start groups and things like that.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. Y'all are quite the power couple, both with the theological background, and that's awesome. What are you mentioned COVID. What kind of challenges did that bring where you were serving?
Well, we were kind of locked in.
We were locked in our house.
It was pretty all of a sudden. We just got news and everything's closed. No one's allowed to go on the streets, and we're like, whoa, what's going on? And we started, which is amazing that, we're talking about villages that usually have no technological, grasp,
Yeah.
and then we're starting to meet them through on the phone.
Zoom. Like they never heard. I'd never heard of Zoom. They never heard of Zoom.
and everybody's just launched into technology.
Wow.
Even the villages where I'm doing a teaching, and there's maybe 6, 7 of them gather around one phone, and they're looking, and I could see them, and then we're rural area. There's a cow walking in the back, and some chickens, and then they're listening. So
you were able to keep doing some things.
We were,
In spite of that,
we were, and I think in some ways, it really kind of pushed them to. It kind of forced them into technology, which now made things easier because now we're able to kind of do some of our meetings online. We're talking about 7 districts, so some places are real far
away. Yeah.
And with roads, it takes even longer. Like distance-wise, you're like, oh, it's not that far. But then with roads, it takes like 7 hours to get to like the farthest part. Or
some roads are I'm going literally 3 miles per hour, and a bicycle's past because there's bumps and
like dodging things,
holes everywhere.
So you're kind of grateful for COVID in the sense that technology kind of shrunk the size down a little bit, and being able to use that to communicate and train and equip. Yeah, that's good. What are some of the things that you've been able to celebrate over the last, let's say, 6, 12 months that you've seen, God at work? Maybe it's in individual lives or something with one of the churches.
Well, we're constantly hearing, on messages and things like that. Like people send pictures. Hey, I got to share the gospel with this person, and this person, started this group and sent a picture back to me, and constantly getting those. And Elizabeth, maybe you should share. We got to help a group where they started this, our training probably 2 years ago, and they're now, it's a process of starting groups and then getting to baptisms. So we got to see one group saying they got 30, 40 people ready for baptism.
Wow.
So we got, so last month we got to go and celebrate with our national partner and see these people take that step of obedience. And I think too, like just in our context of there, like I think in America, you accept the Lord and then you get baptized. There's no like counting the cost. It's just natural, but over there, people really, it's like they accept the Lord and then they really are weighing on that. Like, okay, if I take this step of obedience, like this public display, is my family's going to disown me? I could be beaten up. I can,
privileges being a Hindu in a country that's Hindu would be taken away. Maybe even access to a water well,
food rations
would not be allowed because you're just now become you're not just one of us anymore.
Yeah, and so it was really exciting to see these, like 30 people take that step.
Willing to do that.
Yeah.
Yes.
And there was I'll just say one little story. There was this man and his family, and he had started, I think during COVID time, he started having like his whole body like paralyzed, like paralysis. And they didn't know why. They took him to the doctors. Doctors weren't sure. So his family is like, okay, we got to do something, So they took him to just like Hindu priests. They even took him to a witch doctor, like all of these things, and nothing was working. And so one of our partners, he met this man and he said, I'm going to tell you about Jesus because Jesus, he's the great physician. And so as he began to tell this man about Jesus and what the gospel and this man began to get better. And that man was baptized and his paralysis was completely gone. God had totally healed him. And not only did he get baptized, but his wife also. So just amazing stories of people of God just doing miraculous things. Yeah. And then people, counting the cost, but being obedient to follow through and, that Jesus is worth it.
That's awesome.
So.
And what you shared at the very beginning there, just getting those texts that people are actually doing what you're teaching and equipping them to do. I mean, that sounds like a little thing, but I know as a teacher and equipper, there's no greater joy than when folks kind of catch it and it becomes part of the culture like that. And I know how exciting that must be to get those texts, especially if they come in frequently.
Right. What's exciting is that I'm not there.
They're doing it.
Yeah. And that's ownership.
Yeah. Right? They just want to let you know.
Yeah. They want to celebrate with
you. That's awesome. All right. So, what are some things folks can be praying for you guys? Some, maybe just one or two, each of you share one or two prayer requests.
Well, we have a huge area. We need laborers. We're praying for laborers. There are pathways to either join us or there's laborers need everywhere, but I'm gonna advertise for our area.
Absolutely.
We love, more laborers in districts in our area to kind of be present there and to kind of continue the work. And we do hope in our lifetime that we could see it completed. I think the secondly would be just pray for the nationals there, to be faithful, to continue to learn, to be equipped. Those would be my two.
Yeah. I would just pray specifically for this area where we do the ministry. I kind of mentioned that earlier, but pray that a family would come to believe, and that through that family, they would be a light to their neighbors, and a church could would start planted there. And then I would also pray. This just came to my mind, but we have a partner. Her husband passed away last December, and so now she's a widow. She has a 1-year-old little girl, and so it's hard. It's hard being a woman and a widow, and she's young. But she serves, she does women's trainings with us, and she's faithful to serve the Lord. And so just that God would just continue to provide for her and for her family, and just continue, to still keep pressing on, because I know, it hasn't even been a year yet since her husband passed away. So just the grief and that God would just meet all her needs. So pray specifically for this sister.
Well, I know we have a lot of folks in our church that care deeply about missions, and I truly believe they'll be praying for these things. Let me ask you one final question, Campbell. I know we talked at the very beginning about having teams that have come over in the past and hope to have teams come over in the future. Yeah. For someone that's listening here, that as they hear about mission opportunities and from our church, and this will be one that will be, mentioned in the near future as we get closer to our conference beginning of next year, and then maybe even something this fall. I don't know, but what does that look like for somebody that would participate with you guys on a short-term mission project?
That would be, come. See what the Lord is doing. We'll take care of you. We'll be on the field with you, and that's one thing that we'll be praying. As we partner with McGregor and see how we could strategically, not just kind of a one-time trip kind of thing, but strategically where your presence with us when you guys come would actually build onto the work. So we don't know what that looks like yet. We're praying towards that. But I think for a person that's, if this is your first time overseas or even first time over to South Asia, we'll take care of you. Don't worry. But then we also want you to see the different aspects of work that's happening, and want you to meet nationals. We want you to meet unbelievers, to be able to have a conversation with unbelievers, and just have a worldview that you could see. If you've never been overseas, I'm assuming you might not have seen many of the things that are there in South Asia, and just the lostness. I think seeing the lostness would spur you on, because when you really see how lost they are and how desperate of hope that they don't, just the lack of hope that they have, and you really see how important the gospel is. So I would invite them to come and we'll take care of you. But when we also would
put
say
you to work.
that there's a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, I like that your whole attitude about that you desire to have folks come and experience that, but also to be a part of a partnership that has long-term impact, not just 1 week, but build upon that each time we send a team. And maybe there'll be a day where there'll be multiple teams going out each year.
And I would love it to have McGregor see it as, hey, this is your church is making impact across overseas, and your work is there also as well as it's here. Yeah.
And I'm praying, COVID shut stuff down here for us, where we weren't sending teams out, and we're just now getting teams back out. And so I'm hoping, that's one of the reasons why I really wanted to do this podcast with you guys, so that just reminds people that, there's opportunities that are coming, and just be praying that God would, they would be open to what God's calling them to do as far as serving short term or maybe even long term. Who knows? A lot of those short terms end up being much longer once you get there. So we'll see. Thank you guys so much for being a part of the Here at Home podcast and taking time out to do this. And it has been a joy to get to know you a little bit better and to hear a little bit about your story, and especially about your ministry and what God is doing through both of you. And we will be praying for you and grateful to have this time with you. And I also want to thank our listeners for being a part of the Here at Home podcast. We couldn't do it without you. And as I always say, please subscribe, leave a comment, rate us. I know that Campbell and Elizabeth are gonna go home and subscribe to the Here at Home podcast now, because they didn't even know this existed up until probably 24 hours ago. And another reminder, this is our next to last episode before we wrap up season 2022, our second season. And we'll be right back next week with another episode. So again, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week back here at home.